Welcome into Basketball by Association. It's the BbA Byte. My name is Arky. I'm here with a very massive headache. I don't know if it's coming off in the sound at all. I'm trying to fight through it. I'm a gamer. I'm here with Joel C. Cortez. Joel, hello.
That was a little bit of Nudge Schneebly, School of Rock, Jack Black impersonating Mike White there with the intro. I can dig it.
You can dig it because you're able to throw out all those references. Solid by you, Joel C. Cortez. I don't want to waste any time because the NBA decided from the very beginning of the day to not waste time with the news today too.
Hashtag news dump.
Yeah, and a lot of it. So it's really kind of hard to pick which one's the biggest of the news, especially coming off such a great performance from Kevin Durant. Well, Chris Paul's pretty big too, but Kawhi Leonard is out for now. Could be out the rest of the series and postseason with what is feared to be an ACL injury to his knee. Joel, if you're watching on the old YouTube, not you, but the peeps at home, you'll see Joel C. Cortez is sporting his Western Conference Final champion and great good friend Kawhi Leonard's team shirt.
I am a Kawhi fan. Yep,
with the Clippers. Joel, this is huge.
Yeah, and here's why Kawhi's news is bigger than CP3. CP3 is the X factor for what the Suns do. He's incredibly important. Kawhi Leonard is the X factor, the Y factor, the Z factor. He is basically most of the factors in why the Clippers have gotten this far. Paul George has had his moments, but like Paul George and like we talked about last episode, they kind of come and go, and the Clippers have been inconsistent. Kawhi has been dominant throughout the postseason. When the Clippers have been in trouble, he's upped it with some monster games. The Clippers are certainly still very talented. They're certainly still dangerous. They're playing a Utah Jazz team that is very, very good, but as we've seen kind of all year long, the Jazz are not untouchable. They're a really good team, but they're not untouchable. However, I have a sneaking suspicion that despite all of the depth that the Clippers supposedly have, and Serge Ibaka may be coming back, despite the fact they have Paul George, and Paul George is going to talk a big game. He's going to talk a big game about how he has to step up and put it all on his shoulders. It's going to be eerily reminiscent of some other LA team that lost their MVP caliber player, and the other guy said, these shoulders were built for this, and we saw how quickly the burden was bigger than the shoulders. I have a sneaking suspicion here that the same fate that befell the Lakers is now coming to the Clippers, and that's unfortunate because I wanted to see these Clippers do well. They had been my pick in the West all year, and that's saying something because I like the Jazz, I like the Suns. I'd love to see them in the NBA Finals. I would have loved the Nuggets to be there too.
Well, let's keep talking then about injuries. The Jazz announced that Mike Conley is also going to be out again for Game 5. It'll be his fifth straight miss of the postseason. This one not as massive as a Kawhi Leonard because he's not the stir that clearly stirs the straw, I should say, that clearly stirs the drink of the Utah Jazz. But
which, by the way, is lemonade because they're not allowed to have alcohol in Utah. Having lived there, I can say that.
So it's a lemonade on the rocks, of course. Joe, Mike Conley being out, that's big for Utah as well. This series is getting marred a little bit.
Yeah, they can survive that if Kawhi is gone. Conley's ability at this point in his career, he's no longer an all-star caliber player, of course, but he still is really smart. He makes the right play. His athleticism is definitely waning, but he's a good system defender. And I think the biggest thing that he provided was just depth of minutes in the starting lineup. You could plug him in there next to Donovan Mitchell and know that things were going to be okay. And then most importantly is it allowed you to bring Joe Ingles off the bench, which is kind of his more natural position because Ingles is such a positionless guy. He comes in and fills a little bit of every gap. You just don't want to overtax him. And it allowed them to bring Ingles and Clarkson and Derek Favors as their top three guys off the bench. With Ingles in the starting lineup, you were seeing a little bit more of Juwan Morgan than they would like, of George Nang, who, again, Nang has a role as a shooter, but was being asked to play a lot of minutes, and it was starting to show against the Clippers. So that depth was being tested. They can survive that, I think, a little bit longer without Kawhi, provided they can take advantage of that. Now they go home. They absolutely have to win Game 5. You do not want to let injury-laden Clippers team, one that maybe really, you do not want to let them go up 3-2 and go back home. The Jazz are not good enough to play with that kind of fire. So this really is a must-win Game 5 for Utah, and they're going to need Conley in the next round, again, for all of that that depth and the gaps that he helps fill.
The team that one of those two teams will play is the Phoenix Suns, and they've been done for a couple of days now. And Chris Paul is now in the COVID-19 protocol after testing positive for COVID-19. It was being reported by Jalen Rose that he is thoroughly vaccinated, which means he would have to spend less time in the protocol than if he were not. Mm-hmm. It's a good thing right now that Phoenix has got a little bit of time in between what we're seeing happen right now and at least a few days in between the Western Conference Finals wrapping up, at least 2 more of those games. So, but still, the potential of a Chris Paul is possible Game 1, depending on how this thing rolls out, because he still has to start testing negative at some point.
Yeah, and if you're the Suns, you absolutely cross your fingers at this point and hope that Jazz Clippers go 7 games, regardless of the Kawhi status. You just hope that it's prolonged, that Paul's got enough time to come back, and that if he does have to miss a game, maybe it's only Game 1. The Suns, they are well equipped in point guard level depth. I will say that. Cameron Payne has been a nice player for them off the bench. Javon Carter is a former starter for them. He started alongside Devin Booker in years past. And Devin Booker, as we've seen, can play some point guard as well. He's done that throughout his career. That said, none of those guys are Chris Paul. And if you're taxing Devin Booker to be the primary playmaker, you're losing his ability to run off screens and be a play finisher in a lot of different ways. So Paul's got to get back. It's the savviness. It's the ability, again, it's Mike Conley to an even larger degree. Make the right play almost every time on offense and defense. And in Paul's case, that ability was especially on display against Denver, but it was helpful against the Lakers. Get to that mid-range jumper. Get around the elbow. Get around the lane. Pull the defense in. Knock down that shot if they're a step slow. And if they're on you, make the right pinpoint pass or the hockey assist to set up a good Phoenix 3. That's really where his value lies. And I think there's a lot of psychological value that Paul brings to them. As plucky as Phoenix was during the times that Paul missed some time during the regular season, and especially when he missed a little bit of time with that shoulder injury against the Lakers, remember, that's when the Lakers jumped back into the series. Part of that, too, was they got a little bit of Anthony Davis in there also. But that's all of a sudden when the Lakers found some momentum, and Phoenix just did not look like the same team. They were still hustling as hard. They were still fighting as hard, but there still was that little bit lack of an edge. I've been using this term for a while now with them, that surgical ability that they have to pinpoint stuff and attack you there. To me, that's like 75% of Chris Paul's doing, and the Suns are just so much better with him.
I know that there are I know that we are shorter on time on our BbA Byte, but more injury talk. As Steve Nash says Kyrie Irving is going to be definitely out for Game 6. Does not think he's even going to travel to Milwaukee. James Harden, he thinks, will play at this point. James Harden did come back and play in Game 5, played a whole bunch of minutes, not a whole bunch of production from him in his comeback. So before we get to that game itself, these playoffs and injuries, man, it has been these are by the wayside. We're just trying to get this thing in it, aren't we?
Remember at the very beginning of the year, in fact, before the season started, you and I were on this show and we said it's going to be a weird season. There's probably going to be a lot of injuries. There's going to be ups and downs with COVID. It's just going to be a weird year. And that has continued because a big injury or a couple of big injuries along the way through the playoffs, that happens. I mean, that's a thing that happens every single year. But to get hit with so many of them in critical guys, critical series, critical moments. It's memory is short in these type of instances, but I can't remember too many other years in my time as an NBA fan where it's been boom, boom, boom like this. Now, again, the Nets, they've had this ability all year to play with 2 out of 3 guys and to go 2 out of 3 ain't bad, right? It's good enough to keep them in series and in games, and especially against a Bucks team that is just crap in the bed right now as far as not taking advantage of the advantages they have in front of them. It is so frustrating. We can get into that with the game if you want, but the Nets, even without Kyrie Irving, I honestly think they're more dangerous when it's Harden and Durant than when it's Kyrie and Durant, or certainly when it's Kyrie and James. So Durant's been as good as advertised. Harden, yeah, he played 46 minutes, and that is playing with some fire if you've got a guy with a hamstring injury or whatever he's dealing with. That's a lot of minutes. And you saw he didn't have the lift, he didn't have the scoring ability, but he was still a threat. He drew the defense. And I want to say this for James Harden because he doesn't get credit enough when he does it. James Harden played really effective defense almost all night when he was out there for the Nets, which was almost all night.
Right. And they needed him out there pretty much the entire night. Kevin Durant was out there the entire night, has a huge game. The statistics you already know. No one in NBA history has ever done what he has done this deep into the postseason, which is the 47 points and the 15 rebounds and the 10
17
assists.
Rebounds.
17 rebounds. The stat I saw was the Nets said 15 plus when they were looking up their stat.
3 steals and 2 blocks, right?
Plus play all 48 minutes and get the win. That is a superstar performance from Kevin Durant. He quite literally carried that team to the win. And Joe, we can get to why Milwaukee was allowing him to be able to get to that spot, including maybe possibly having your former MVP himself maybe guard Kevin Durant a couple of times, which they did not do. Yes. But just a brief moment or two on Kevin Durant and that spectacular performance when really it was him and one-legged James Harden and who was it that had the 7 threes?
Jeff Green.
They
gave up 27 points, the Bucks did, to Jeffrey Green.
Yeah, Jeff Green.
Also coming back from injury, by the way.
Talk to me about what you thought of the performance from Kevin Durant and where that sort of stood in what you've seen this postseason.
We know Durant is capable of making tough shots. We know that he is pretty much automatic if you're going to give him good looks. And the thing that really impressed me about Durant, beyond the good defense that he has played all series, and I've been tongue-in-cheek about not giving the Nets a lot of credit defensively because they've kind of just been there and done their job, but credit is due for the fact that they've all continued to do their job. And Durant has basically morphed into their lead defender, plus doing all the stuff that he does on offense. What really impressed me, though, about Kevin Durant was his ability to get to the spots that he wanted, regardless of the defense being thrown at him by the Bucks, which you're right, very rarely included Giannis for whatever reason. This is a first-team all-defensive guy in Giannis Antetokounmpo, by the way, who you decided not to put on Kevin Durant. You didn't even give Drew Holiday, another first-team all-defensive guy, any cracks at him. You
got 2 first-team all-defenders, and they're none of them getting a shot at the guy who's literally about to score 50 on you. And
you have Giannis guarding Joe Harris. So, but Durant, he got to his spots, and the Nets were very patient in setting him up to those spots and moving the ball to him if he didn't have it so that he could get his spots. And here again, I know when we've talked about this series, I've spent so much time lamenting what the Bucks have not done. It is such a big difference when you look between the two, right? The patience of Durant, but the persistence of, I didn't get there off of this dribble. I'm going to keep attacking. I'm going to pull it back out. I'm going to go back at you. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to give the ball up for a minute, but cut and get it right back into that spot that I wanted to go. You will not deny me from getting where I need to be. And then you see Giannis, 3 dribble attack, turn it over, 3 dribble attack, falling into the KG Karl Malone trap of, I'm big and I'm going to take a fadeaway jumper when I'm a dominant post player, but I fall in love with my fadeaway because I have James Harden guarding me. Like we saw that in crunch time. Or Kevin Durant drives, passes it off, and what happens? Drew Holiday or Chris Middleton goes into a bad ISO with no screen, no ball movement, and the ball never finds Giannis again. And what's so maddening about that, and I know I'm taking time away from Kevin Durant, and he's the guy who deserves it, but what's so maddening is Giannis still had 34 points and 12 boards, and when he did get to his spots and was persistent like that, good things happened most of the time. So he has to be doing that every time, right? Every single time you have to carry your team at this point, and Durant did that, and Giannis did not.
Well, that's the thing. You did great, Giannis, offensively. You needed more.
By the box score, right? But the eyeball test says not so great, right?
Yeah, if you just want to throw the box score out there, you could say that was a great game.
Mm-hmm.
But I think at one point it got everyone was listening to this. If you're listening to this, you watch the game. Big lead at the half for Milwaukee. Brooklyn cuts it basically in half in just a few minutes to start the second half.
And you could feel it. You knew Milwaukee was in trouble, right? You just knew it.
They call a timeout and they're like, okay, all right, batten down the hatches. Here we go. At one point, I think it got tied 91-91.
Yes.
And I saw this get pointed out on Twitter where there was 6 straight possessions where either one or two guys max touched the ball, including Giannis putting up the threes, Chris Middleton doing ISO ball. Like, it was just the maddening thing we've talked about for the first 4 games of this entire series, which is the reason Milwaukee is in a good enough position where they could have won this series by now.
Yes.
Had they have just just learned from their previous mistake in game 1. They could have. This could be not 3-2 their way. It could be over their way and getting ready for Philadelphia or Atlanta.
Amen.
I will never. I laughed out loud and woke my wife up when I saw. She had an early day. Doesn't matter. When I saw James Harden covering Giannis, and Giannis does the fadeaway, and I said, "Well, they're not winning the game." Like, he is not. He's doing enough to fill the stat sheet, but he's not doing enough to win the game and take advantage of the opportunities that are there in crunch time. The hardest time when you're close and in that game, you can't take a fadeaway. Like, put your trunk into James Harden's beard and back that guy down.
Do not underestimate the severity of those types of bailout shots and what that can mean. And again, Giannis's career is early. He still has time to move on from this. But this is
year 8. Like, this is 8 years into the league. Like, he's not a baby.
And I say this having watched Kevin Garnett do that for years. Dominant post player, and when crunch time came, he would seize up just a little bit and start bailing out into that fadeaway shot, which, yes, he can make sometimes. But given the amount of success that you have with your post up and the sheer talent, it was a maddening thing to watch Garnett do it. And we had seen Karl Malone do it before him. And Karl Malone doesn't have a ring. And Kevin Garnett never had a ring when he was the number 1 option. It became very clear that both of those guys needed somebody else to take the crunch time shot. That was not them. You know, KG could lead a defense and absolutely be that guy, and he could be your second or third guy, but he needed a Sam Cassell, Latrell Sprewell, or a Paul Pierce and a Ray Allen to kind of do the offensive work for him. And Malone, we never really got to see what else he would have been, you know, with another scorer alongside him, because Stockton wasn't necessarily a pure scorer, right? So, like, do not underestimate how big of a deal this could be for the Bucks, because Chris Middleton has been their crunch time guy. He has been the guy during the regular season that the ball does find in those moments, and I've got no problem with that when it's in rhythm. Chris Middleton is a very good ISO player, but not playing stupid ISO. Right? Because that's what the Bucks are doing. They're playing stupid ISO against a bad defensive team that you are letting them look phenomenal. And again, I want to give the Nets credit because they have stayed on their assignments. They've stayed in position. They've communicated well. They have done a lot of the intangible things that we're like, man, I don't know if the Nets can even do that during the regular season. They have stepped up their defensive game. But the Brooklyn Nets are not a good defensive team. They're playing well. They're not good. And the Bucks, if the Bucks would come back and win this in 7, I will still go to my grave saying Milwaukee did not deserve to win that series. They flat out didn't. And Brooklyn, with all of the stuff that they've been up against and the injuries, and with, Kevin Durant stepping up and a lot of those other guys playing better than average defense, including Harden, including Kyrie, I hate to say it, because we've kind of been, tongue-in-cheek rooting against them during the year because it's another Hollywood is hell type of team. They deserve to win this series. Like, they just do.
Right. I watched Giannis put up he made a couple of threes last night. I had a prop bet on him making a couple of threes, and that was fine and all. But every time he would shoot it, especially even we make it, when he would make the couple he made, I would say, okay, knock it off. Like that's not how you win the game.
Don't win me any more money.
Yeah, it's like we're good. Like stop. Like I don't understand. Like you're not going to win the game that way. Like like every time Giannis shoots a 3 in the fourth quarter, like Budenholzer needs to be there to like trip him on the way back. Like, okay, see, don't do it again. Don't do it again.
And every time in a late clock scenario, now granted, this only happened a couple of times in game 5, but every time in a late clock scenario that the ball finds PJ Tucker in the corner for a 3, Brooklyn is just laughing maniacally at that, right? Like, seriously, the ball cannot wind up in his hands for that. And that and the Giannis threes, like, they are an absolute epitome of everything that's going wrong for Milwaukee. And this was the fear that we had when Mike Budenholzer was hired by the Bucks. We said he's going to take them and make them a much more professional outfit than they were under Jason Kidd. They will take a step forward. They will win more regular season games. But man, based on what we saw from Mike Budenholzer in Atlanta, he is a regular season coach, not a playoff coach. And that type of cliche gets thrown around way too much. But I'm sorry, the glove fits in this case. And we have been very concerned about that from the get-go, and we have yet to ever see evidence to the contrary.
A couple of stories I want to mention real quick in succession, then we'll wrap up by talking about Philly and Atlanta. Stan Van Gundy is out with the Pelicans after one season. He could have stayed on, but it seemed like that they were after the season was over on May 17th. They had exit interviews, and it seemed like it was going to go not the most positive direction. So they've been working on a way to get out, and now Stan Van Gundy is officially out. That also on the heels of Washington, who is now looking for a new head coach as well. Scott Brooks is out as well. His contract was up after the playoffs, and they could not see eye to eye on a contract extension. So it's just going to be splitting of the ways. Real quick before we get to that, do you think you could name? I have the list in front of me. All right. Do you think you could tell me the longest tenured head coaches in the NBA? Because I bring this up because Scott Brooks was number 7, and the next 25 are below. Oh, excuse me, were hired in 2018 or later.
Mm-hmm.
So
the guys above him, and I will admit I saw some of this list beforehand.
Okay. Go ahead.
But it's it's Pop, it's Spoelstra, right. It's Steve Kerr, Rick Carlisle.
That's 1, 2, 4, and 3 you mentioned. Scott Brooks was 7, so you're missing 5 and 6 on that list.
Brad Stevens was on that list previously, and now he's gone, so he doesn't count. I don't know. Give me the other ones for the sake of time, because Terry Stotts in Portland would have been on that list too. He was around for a long time and now is gone.
This is part of a theme I was going to mention, that there's a lot of turnover now. Quinn Snyder and Mike Malone are your next two on there. So Stan Van, and Scott Brooks are now out. We have a lot of turnover that is happening in this offseason for the head coaches. Not to mention what's happened in the middle of the season, including with the Atlanta Hawks. I guess that's all I really had. Do you have any thoughts on those firings? I mean, like we can talk about positions and who might get hired later, but I just wanted to bring it up.
Scott Brooks will coach again probably next year.
They were in the playoffs 3 out of the 5 years he was there. Just when they were not in the playoffs, they were terrible.
He's going to be very intriguing to a team like Indiana or Portland that has continued playoff aspirations. I like the idea of Scott Brooks in Portland a whole lot more than them trying to bring Mike D'Antoni back. I think D'Antoni, who's assisting in Brooklyn, I think he's reached a point in his career where he probably is best served as like the sage assistant coach. I don't think he's a head coach anymore. I don't think Stan Van Gundy should coach again in the NBA for a while. I think he would have to show that he can be an assistant for a bit, and I think his ego probably won't let that happen. He has not had a good ability to connect with players, whether he was in Detroit or New Orleans.
He just feels like he's burnt out and done with it. Like I think he's done for at least now for a while. Like I think he just needs a big break. I
think that time has passed. And I'm going to say this just to wrap up the coaches, and we'll talk more about all these different guys out there. But NBA, and I know this is a big push, but I really would like to see this, especially with a lot of these teams right now. Don't go back to the retread options. There are so many black coaches, assistant coaches who have been waiting in the wings. Sam Cassell, David Vanterpool. There's a whole bunch of them.
They were thinking Teresa Witherspoon.
Witherspoon, yeah, and she's a really intriguing candidate. Obviously you've got in San Antonio, and now her name is escaping me too because I'm on the spot here. There's a lot of minority and women candidates that are available. Instead of going the retread route, give those folks their shot, especially on some of these rebuilding teams, especially like New Orleans where they're up and coming. Like it's time to do that and to stop talking about it so much, but to broaden the coaching pool a little bit. And I think this is a perfect opportunity to see that with, like 6-7 openings here all of a sudden.
Exactly. In places that may want the freshness. Becky Hammond, you're speaking about.
Yeah. Thank you.
That Boston seems like they could use like a completely fresh restart there. Could be the same. Maybe not Portland.
Becky Hammond would be cool in Boston. That would be real cool in Boston with that kind of hierarchy behind her, and Brad Stevens, I think, would be very empowering. And
there was another woman that was coaching with them who's now the coach, I think, at Duke. Is that right?
Yeah, wasn't that Gottlieb? I thought she had been there. It's hard to keep track. She may have been in Cleveland. I can't remember.
Looking at her, it's Carol Lawson.
Okay. Yeah.
That she had coached with the Celtics and for a couple years ago. I think her last year was Kyrie's last year too. Anyway, finally, let's give a couple thoughts on the Hawks taking on the Philadelphia 76ers. The Hawks showing a lot of mettle and coming back and winning Game 4.
Yeah, they did.
Tying that series 2-2. I thought they didn't have it in them to come back and fight back in. Just like I didn't think Philly had it in them to come back in Game 1. It's big down in different circumstances, of course. But Atlanta did it, and both these two teams seem worthy of a battle with each other. And I'm excited for what Game 5 is going to consist of. But, Joel, we're going to wrap it up with your thoughts.
Yeah, in our previous episode on Sunday, you had asked, how can the Hawks get back in it? And we talked about the fact that, like, Philly just overmatches them talent-wise, and that the Hawks really had to keep fighting, but the margin for error was going to be much smaller, and they were helped out margin for error wise in that Joel Embiid, who looked very spry in games 2 and 3, not so much in Game 1 when Philly lost, all of a sudden in Game 4, like you saw, he's laboring again. He doesn't have torque on the knee.
He said he wanted to go up for a few dunks and just couldn't gather himself. Couldn't do it, even though he went for 17 and 21. That's not the exact spread he was looking for as far as the production he wanted.
And almost all of that was in the first half, right? And so kudos to Atlanta for taking advantage of that, continuing to fight. John Collins didn't have a great game. He was 6 of 15. Trae Young was 8 of 26 on the night. So they just kept plugging away. And this injury issue, keep in mind, like Atlanta has won both times that Joel Embiid has been laboring, and they've lost both times that he has looked healthy. And that seems fitting when you've got an MVP candidate like Embiid, who is so important to everything they do and the gravity he creates. And now that like the Shake Milton wild card has been played, right. They know when Shake is coming in. They're prepared for that a little bit more. He has not been as effective as, when he showed up in game 2 or whatever it was and just, really, really helped them out. Games 4 and 5 or 3 and 4 here, have been a little bit more pedestrian for Shake, but they're going to need that shot in the arm from somebody, whether it's Maxey, whether it's Milton having a great game. And what we cannot see is Ben Simmons disappear, right? Ben Simmons has to stand up, get into the paint. We've talked about this quite a few times. It's almost like the Giannis thing. Like, you have to get to your spots, put your imprint on things offensively. Yes, Ben Simmons is being asked to do a ton defensively. He's being tasked with primarily guarding Trae Young, and he's doing a heck of a job of it. He's done really, really great work with that when he's been on him, and good team defense elsewhere. But you got to ignite easy baskets now. Tobias Harris has got to step up, and yeah, he had 20 points in game 4, but I would be highly surprised if we see Embiid come out and all of a sudden look like he's got pep in his step for the rest of the series.
Yeah, I feel like a little fatigue factor has got to him. He had a little bit of rest going into the beginning of this series. Now I think that could be concerning. I think looking at the box score is for a game that was 103-100. There's some really wild line totals on here. Like John Collins went 14 and 12. Mm-hmm. Clint Capella was 12 and 13. Trae Young, 25 points, 18 assists, Joel Cordes.
Yeah, which is a testament to a young guy when he's not shooting the ball well, 8 of 26, that he's still touching the ball on so many possessions, and something good is still happening even when he doesn't score, right?
Yep, and Ben Simmons, as you mentioned, went 11, 12, and 9, was 1 assist shy of a triple-double, and, of course, Joel Embiid, 17 and 21, but again, the second half where he really quieted down. Philadelphia's a big favorite right now for tonight. They're like a 6.5, 7-point favorite. Feels high based on how this series is going.
Well, they're going back home. I think there's some of that behind it.
There's some of that behind it, but that's also a team that was down like 25 or some point at home in game 1. But we'll see. I wouldn't touch that number if I was anybody paying attention, if you know what I'm saying. I wouldn't play it the other side either. It's been a wacky series, but it hasn't lacked for entertainment value. These playoffs, even though we're losing like all of our stars all of a sudden, still been a really interesting playoff. And by the way, the ratings are up 36% from last year, which, well, it was in the bubble, but even 3% up from the year before when it was a normal postseason. So
I'm just going to end things on a beef. I'm not even going to explain it. We can talk about it a different time if we want.
Okay.
I'm just going to lob some shade out there. How in the world is Devin Booker, much less Jason Tatum, much less Donovan Mitchell, not on any of the all-NBA teams, but LeBron and Kyrie are? I'm just going to leave it at that. But how in the world is that happening? I'm out for the BbA Byte, or this is going to turn into a full episode, and we shouldn't do that.
I'm okay with your Kyrie slander. I'm just glad you did mention you wanted to take off Julius Randle off that list. He earned his spot.
Oh, yeah, he earned his spot. I got no problem with that. Did he receive some votes for all defensive teams? Yes. Am I a little bit skeptical of that? Yes. Okay, but he deserves all NBA placement where he did. That was fine.
Okay. All right, Joel, say goodbye to the good folks.
See you, folks. And, of course, you can find us on YouTube, like, share, subscribe, and all of that good stuff. And also wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, and Spreaker, and everywhere. Bye.